So we're just continuing. We're continuing the series, talking about God's heart, and today we'll be discussing the actual, no longer the shadows. We're actually going to be discussing Jesus. We're going to start this off in the story of Daniel, and we know that Daniel, he interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and because of that, Nebuchadnezzar lifted him up, and he became the wisest man out of all the wise men. So once he did that, it's very clear that the wise man that came, this is my little Jesus in his, I'm not sure what this is supposed to be, but he's in the manger there, and I don't know, some little gig thing I made up there. But when the wise man came to show their tribute to baby Jesus, these are the same wise men. When you look at the direction, like where they're coming, it says they came from the east. Well, the Bible tells us that that location, that's where Daniel was. So when Daniel became the wisest of the wise men in that area, Daniel was a Hebrew. He was a Jew. So he knew about the Messiah to come, and he's the one that influenced these men. So what's really neat about that story is it said they came from the east. So here we are in Eden. God said he had planted a garden in the east of Eden when he put the cherubims and the flaming sword. Those things were at the east of Eden, and these guys came from the east, and they were considered wise men. When Moses spoke to God, this is a small picture of the ark. When Moses spoke to God from this side of the ark, who is he speaking to? Moses had to have been talking to wisdom, which we know that God is very wise, but he's speaking to wisdom. Daniel was the wisest of the wise men. So these wise men learned from wisdom about Christ. It's not a coincidence they came from the east. It's not a coincidence at all. All these things are there to kind of just confirm every little part of the way, all the stories. So when Jesus is born, the wise men, and it doesn't give us a number of how many they were. Now, they may have brought 3 kinds of gifts, but we don't know how many there were. And just to get straight to the point, you are a wise man, woman, man, men. You are a wise man. If you have received Christ, you are a wise man. So the wise men seek truth. So yes, in the real story, the wise men came and paid tribute to Jesus. They brought him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What's really cool about these 3 items is that we know that gold symbolizes deity, representing Christ. At the top of the ark, that whole solid plate that was on the top of the mercy seat was solid gold, and obviously that represents Christ, who is covering our sins. Frankincense was used, beautiful picture of these Hebrew and Jews here, but when they offered offerings to the Lord, many times, if not all the times, they used frankincense to burn with whatever type of sacrifice or offering that they were doing. They would throw frankincense inside of it, and it would give off this aroma, which is pleasing to the Lord. Myrrh, many things you can discuss about myrrh. When Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, Joseph was given to Ishmaelite merchants, and that their merchant was full of spices. And there's a man, King Solomon, he has a Songs of Solomon. In there, it's talking about Christ, but it talks about who is this that comes out from the wilderness that is smell of all the merchants and all the spices. We know that Joseph is a shadow of Christ, who's been betrayed, and there's love, grace, and mercy throughout all of Joseph's story, all the way down to him forgiving his brothers and having authority to destroy them, but he helps them. And his brother Benjamin, he gives Benjamin all the grace, love, and mercy, and it's an awesome story. But the point I'm getting at is about the myrrh. In the Songs of Solomon, King Solomon says in his writing that his beloved was at the door, and he went to see his beloved, but when he opened the door, there was no one there. But what it says is the doorknob and his hand was dropping drops of myrrh, and it smelt of myrrh. So what's funny is this beloved left a fragrance. So we can look at that as a love story, but when you really pay attention to what King Solomon, now you understand King Solomon was the wisest man and the richest man that basically ever lived in comparison to other people. And King Solomon, again, shadow of Christ here. So if King Solomon was the wisest of men and he wrote these things down, where is he getting wisdom to write these kind of things down where they intertwine with every other story throughout the Bible? So for the wise man to come from the east and to give these three specific gifts, worship, offering, sacrifice, all frankincense, myrrh, there's a smell, specific smell that comes from Christ. That story, when you continue through other verses that Solomon writes, they're all pointing a finger to Christ, every one of them. But this specific one is myrrh. So when these three wise men came, they gave gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We go to the Old Testament and we can see gold, frankincense, and myrrh being used for these specific reasons. How did these men know that these three gifts are going to be the one? Now, when you speak to carnal men, they say that all three of these are very expensive. They're not easy to come by. Now, that may be true, but that's not why they gave them. They did just not give them gifts because they were expensive. We're talking about wisdom here. These are called wise men. These are not men that are guessing. They know exactly what they're doing. I strongly believe that Daniel told them when that day comes, when that star comes and you follow it and you find this baby, bring these three things to him. Daniel himself may not have known why. He may not have known the exact reason, but somewhere in there he knew that this was to be brought to Jesus. And these wise men were influenced by Daniel, and I believe they just did exactly what Daniel said. I believe that Daniel's rapport with those people was so great that they honored his word. And so here we are several years later, and Jesus comes in the picture, which is probably 500 or more years later. I think Daniel was like around 500 BC, I think. But anyhow, so again, we're talking about the heart of Christ, but now we're no longer talking about shadows. We're talking about the actual, who was Jesus. Jesus is the heart, the thing that is pleasant. He is, if you will, Eden in our presence. Once again, the heart of God. Okay? Again, that's just based on the four soils, the good ground. He's the good ground. You got to understand, at this point, when Jesus came, everybody in the world was spiritually dead. So when he came to the earth, he's the only good ground on earth. He's the only thing that is able to receive a seed. And the Bible tells us as he grew, he got more wise. So Jesus didn't come in this world knowing how to do anything. He was a baby. He had to learn just like all of us. Why? Because the word is true. First comes the blade, then the ear, and then the full corn in the ear. So if that's true for all humans, and he was a human, then my friend, Jesus himself had to have seeds planted in him, and they brought forth fruit. So, okay, so there's, again, that's one that's kind of broken down. And I think the next one I'm going to do is probably, I'm not sure yet. I'll probably do Jesus as he walked this earth. I'm not really sure. So, but as of right now, that's pretty much Heart of God finally came. Gifts that were given to him. And all right, we'll see y'all next time.